Everybody smiles in the same language. A smile, let your light come shining through.
Welcome to the Celebrate Happiness Roadshow podcast. I'm Sandra M., coming to you from Santa Fe, New Mexico, the land of enchantment. I interview people from all parts of the world about what happiness means to them. What are they in love with? In each episode, we'll give you a key to happiness to include in your life. And of course, we'll play a happy tune from my live Celebrate Happiness Roadshow.
A smile doesn't cost you anything.
Today we're talking with Beth Allgood, founder and executive director of One Nature Institute, a nonprofit that develops innovative approaches to support community well-being in biodiversity and climate projects. Beth was named one of the Explorer Club's 50 People Changing the World in recognition of her innovative work for transforming conservation. Her work to create more sustainable outcomes for people and wildlife draws upon 25-plus years of experience in conservation and community development at organizations such as the Peace Corps, United States Agency for International Development, World Wildlife Fund, the Nature Conservancy, and International Fund for Animal Welfare. Beth is an inspiring speaker who has presented on Capitol Hill, the United Nations, and many special events and conferences around the globe. Welcome, Beth. I am so excited to talk with you about happiness and what happiness means to you and why is it important in your life?
Well, I'm very, very excited to be here, so thank you for having me. And that is such a hard question, but I think ultimately it comes down to connection for me. Happiness is connection to other people, to nature, to animals, to something, bigger than just myself. And it really gives me a lot of peace to feel like we're all connected,
Mm-hmm. And that is sort of your life's work, isn't it?
It is.
Reading your introduction. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is. Well, I've been working in conservation for 25 years, and a lot of people get into conservation because they love animals and they love nature, and I did too. I think that's fantastic. And as I've evolved through it, I've gotten even more interested in how people connect to nature and in sort of alternative approaches to valuing nature, because, we have a tendency in Western society, at least, to value something economically primarily. And that is a way that people, talk about conservation, that how much, a tree it's worth, how much carbon it emits, or sequesters or whatever. But there's so much more to the way we connect to nature and the way we connect to wildlife and why it's meaningful to us. And I have just found it my passion to understand that about myself, but also to understand that about the communities that are really stewarding the world's most endangered animals and places, and how we can better support them doing that than just trying to impose our values on top of them and get them to do what we want them to do because we want to do it. So it's been a really interesting exploration that sort of started with me and trying to understand my well-being and what well-being and happiness means to me, discovering what was going on in Bhutan and that you could do that at a policy level, which, to support people's well-being, which was an amazing revelation to me when I first learned about it, but then bringing it to an actual community, and how we can do it. We don't have to change all of society We have to kind of work on our own inner happiness, but we can work at a community level. And that's where I found a lot of passion and a lot of interest in how we can merge those two things, happiness and nature, into a way that builds kind of a better future for all of us.
Could you give us an example of a community that you're working with somewhere in the world, or that you have worked with or have knowledge about, and how the community and the wildlife interacted for the benefit of both, making them both happy? Because I think wildlife needs to be happy also, right? I mean, they have to have enough food and enough land to roam in and that sort of thing. And we are taking away a lot of their homes, aren't we, in many ways, and vice versa?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think, that we also have a tendency to see human-wildlife conflict as generated by the wildlife. But the fact is, when wildlife are left alone, there's really no conflict, right? I mean, it's when people are competing for water or other resources, when we're trying to expand, buildings and things into habitat that was previously wildlife, that's when we start to get more and more conflict. And so I think I'll give an example of a story I heard that we wrote in a paper from a community in Nepal who talked about snow leopards. And snow leopards, there can be conflict with snow leopards because a lot of people are very small scale herders, or they have livestock, but like a few, not like a giant ranch, So if a snow leopard takes one of their, cattle or sheep or something, it's a big loss. It's a big loss for them. And so it would be natural to kind of retaliate, and that is something that happens all over the world. But in this particular community, the story that one of the elders was telling is that he tells the youth about a time when they did retaliate, and they actually killed many snow leopards. And snow leopards are also considered to be the sacred guardians of the mountain. So, it was not culturally really that cool to kill snow leopards, but they were feeling really under threat because they weren't able to raise enough food and all that. So they killed some, and they have the story that the mountains lost their echo without the snow leopards, which is just a stunning image. And it's not about the economic value or the, ecosystem service. It's about truly like being a part of the landscape and having reverence for these animals that they considered the sacred guardians of the mountain. So they tell this story to the youth now so that the youth will not kill snow leopards, even when they have issues, so there's lots of things you have to do to sort of address the fundamental conflict, try to, protect the pens for these livestock and various other things you can do to mitigate the chance that it'll happen. Yes. But it also really helps that there's a sense of reverence and connection to the animal too.
Right, which we don't have here in the United States with the wolves, correct?
Yes, this is such an interesting and tricky issue. I mean, there certainly are people in the United States, including native populations, who revere the wolves, and then there's a lot of animosity towards the wolves too. And so it's interesting when you look at like what's going on around the world, because the number of livestock that wolves actually take in the U.S. is much lower than in some of these other places, and we have compensation schemes, to give compensation to ranchers who lose livestock. And in this wolf case, it's a really like a cultural touchstone for. Some people think it's government overreach, and some people think, so I don't think it's purely about the wolves. There's a lot wrapped up in that relationship. But certainly there's sad kind of relationships that people have with wolves. I mean, there was a case recently where someone just tortured a wolf in a bar with, it was just awful.
Yes.
And that is not the sort of, honestly, it's obviously not good for the wolf, but that kind of relationship doesn't make people happy either. I mean, it's it's innate in us to be, we are animals. We're connected to animals. We're a part of nature. Like, we're not separate. And so when we do things that are really quite abusive to animals or people or nature, it hurts us. We don't feel happy. And one way to feel happier is to really embrace that connection and learn what some other people are doing in other cultures, and think about sort of more traditional indigenous types of relationships, because we're all born from that. Ultimately, that's the way people and nature have evolved together, right? And it's only very recently that we've kind of separated ourselves so much from nature, and caused a lot of longing in people's hearts that they don't really know how to identify or shift. Wow. And I think that being in nature and seeing kind of the cultural or spiritual relationship you can have with an animal, your own dog, your own cat, but also that other animals have the same or more, depending on the animal, possibly, sentience, and there are other creatures that have a right to be here, and it actually helps us when we can connect with them, I think.
Join Sandra M. for her live performance of the Celebrate Happiness Roadshow, a toast to love and happiness in life, an uninhibited musical adventure guaranteed to awaken your happiness vibe. Celebrate with upbeat rhythms, love songs, and fun stories, some told by you in the audience. Sandra's musical guest and accompanist, Todd Lowry, sings his hopeful and happy originals. To book Sandra M. and the Celebrate Happiness Roadshow, email sandra@sandramcknight.com. Celebrate happiness with Sandra M.
This reminds me of a show I saw on PBS just the other day about all the animals that are in Ukraine and have been suffering and bombed and killed and this and that. And I suppose what we would call humane, like we have the Humane Society here, they have sort of the similar things. And I don't know how many dogs and the bombs and the dogs went wild. And they have what they call during in the war itself, at present time, what they call the zoo patrol, and they go and they register they save animals that have been left because, or their people have been killed in the bombs and that sort of thing, and the people who are doing the rescuing are saying that it's helping them get through the war, to actually rescue an animal and to save these dogs and to save these cats. And of course, people, I guess in Ukraine, I was astounded to hear this, but they keep lions and bears and things as pets. And so they had to rescue lions and bears out of rural areas in Ukraine, and they're being shipped to Spain and other places. But the rescuers, it's giving them, basically, as one woman says, it's helping us to maintain our humanity. To rescue animals is helping us to maintain our humanity. Your thoughts?
Yeah, that is really interesting. I think that because I've worked in conservation and animal welfare for so long, I have had people say, well, then you care about animals and not people. And I think that was one of the things that that led me to really exploring the relationship between good animal welfare and good conservation and happiness, because it's not animals or people, and I know because in the organization I used to work for does animal rescue, and they did some animal rescue in Ukraine and in Australia after the bushfires, and in California after the fires. And it's interesting because there's a lot of pushback. Like, why are you rescuing animals when people are really in trouble? But one thing that we found over, the last decades, take Hurricane Katrina, for instance, there wasn't a plan in place to rescue the animals, the pets, the companion animals, and people did not want to leave their houses and leave their animals there. So it puts people in danger to not have a plan. And then when you're recovering and you're in the shelter and, and your animal is somewhere else, it doesn't support your mental health as a person who really, connects with your animal. So, I think I absolutely can see what you're saying, and I think it's true. I think that having like a disaster plan or a plan in place for refugee camps or whatever that has an animal component to it, it's not because you care more for animals than you care for people. It's because you care for both, and people need animals. They love animals.
Right.
And they want their animal with them if they're going through, a recovery type of situation. And, there's a lot of research around the slaughterhouses and how working in a slaughterhouse can be it can really have some really bad effects on mental health, because you have to you have to kind of hide your humanity or separate yourself from your compassion for your job, and you don't just pick it up at the door when you go back out, So there's definitely a relationship of how people can be more human by treating animals well.
Exactly. And this is what this whole PBS show was focusing on. I mean, a lot of these people had been killed. Their animals didn't die in the bombing of an apartment building, for instance, and so forth. It's just amazing. So I would like to shift the conversation a bit to, you had mentioned earlier, to the inner happiness, that you have happiness on a community level, that your work is involved with that to a great extent. And then you had mentioned inner happiness. And I think our listeners would love to know how you feel that nature and the animal world, as we relate to it, brings each of us more inner happiness. Is nature really restorative for us? People go out for a walk, they go out for a hike, they feel less stress.
Absolutely. There is so much research and evidence. I mean, and you can feel it yourself, I think, when you go outside. There's just something really restorative about being in nature. And there's, forest bathing, which is it's not new, but it is a resurging, I guess, in people being interested in going out in forests and just communing with the trees. But there's a lot of real science around, the role that nature plays for our health, our physical health, of course, our mental health, our emotional well-being. And I think, I have my perspective on inner happiness and kind of policy well-being or things like that is that, we can preserve nature and conserve it and make sure that there are sanctuaries where we can go. But the individual has the responsibility to actually go out and do it, see how they feel. Maybe it's not exactly the same for everyone. So experiment with it. And there's so much research around petting your dog and how, it can reduce blood pressure and things like that. And so the evidence is out there, but everyone does have a different experience, and it could be quite a bit more intense for some individuals than others. And just because that is there doesn't make you happier. You have to actually engage with it in some way to see the benefits for yourself. That's my philosophy.
Do you think people are engaging more since the pandemic and being locked up in our rooms and our houses and so forth? I know a lot of people did decide to go out and hike a little bit. At least they could do that.
Yes, yeah. There's a lot of reports, during the pandemic. You might remember people were saying that like wildlife that had never been seen before was running through towns in Europe and
yes, I know.
America and things like that. And people were reporting way more birds than they had ever seen before. And that is it made people really interested, and I think it was a couple of things. One, we had to take a pause from our busy lives and just be. A lot of people couldn't be in crowded city places because of the pandemic. So they would go to nature, which you were allowed to walk in parks and things pretty much anywhere. And so they were there, and they might have normally been at a shopping mall or something like that, but it was closed, right? And we didn't have the same noise, so you could hear the bird songs. There was I think a lot of factors that made it, and then of course people weren't driving in the cars in the middle of the road the way they had been, so animals could walk down. We had a fox walking down the middle of our road in suburban DC. And so you combine all of those things together, and I think it created a sense of like, oh, look, there's a whole world that's going on around us, a whole natural world that we have really been able to kind of, or forced, I would say, to ignore in our busy, busy lives. And so when our busy, busy lives lighten up a little bit, you can notice things. And then the other amazing thing was how quickly certain things rebounded, carbon emissions went down dramatically during COVID and the beginning of COVID when there were all these lockdowns. So, it's possible to do these things that are considered impossible. We just have to have the right motivation and a strong enough motivation to make change, because the earth can regenerate itself. Nature can regenerate. We just have to stop pushing it so hard.
We invite you and yours to an intimate 14-day happiness journey to Bhutan, the lost kingdom of happiness, coming in May of 2024. Experience the magnificent beauty, magic, and mystery of this ancient culture that calculates the gross national happiness of its people. Happiness, Bhutan style, is an adventure of a lifetime. Go to BhutanLostKingdomTours.com and click on Special Tour Packages to download your itinerary for Being in Love with Life, a happiness journey to Bhutan with Miss Sandra McKnight. And remember, celebrate happiness with Sandra M.
Absolutely. You're making me think about so many ideas and so many thoughts, but we're coming close to the end of our conversation. And I just was wondering if there's anything you would like to leave us with, some words of wisdom, just something that we can do to get engaged in nature, because you did say that nature is there waiting, right? And that we just have to have the willpower to go out, or we just have to make the decision to engage in nature. So there must be a lot of ways we can do it other than going out and walking in your neighborhood or taking a trip to Grand Canyon and things of that nature. But are there other things that we can do to engage in nature? Like get involved actively in certain...
Yeah, of course. Yeah, there's a lot. I would say that many of us have access to nature, fairly easily, and that we can just do it. But I'm sure you're aware, but there's a very large equity gap around access to nature in the United States, and a lot of more economically poor communities don't have trees. They don't have the access to the nature spaces that we do. So I think for me, take advantage of what you have around you, but I think also think about the how we can maybe help with this nature equity gap, because people who are living in difficult situations, they need nature even more, and yet they often don't have access to it. So this is something that I find really compelling, and I think that, some of these regenerative nature type of projects, city gardens. I mean, nature, you can have a plant. It's nature, right? You can, if you're not right outside with a forest next to you, you can plant a garden. You can even posters and things of nature help people heal in hospitals. There's evidence around having a window is looking out on nature helps with healing in hospital settings. But, we can bring some of that in. And I think this idea of thinking about your own access to nature, and then maybe just a little expanding your connection just a little bit more to how we can help bring nature to some urban spaces that need it. So there's lots of groups doing it. I don't have any actually off the top of my head, but I'm sure that I can think of a couple and email you with them and maybe put it in the notes or something. But yeah, I think I guess one other thing I would say is that in conservation, it has traditionally been a very like Western conservationists go to developing countries and try and help people, with their nature with our value system, and without really understanding what the connection to nature already is in that community. And so I think that's another big thing. I think we need to understand that different people and different cultures have different connections, and the more we can learn about that, the more expansive we can, feel about our own connection, and the more it can inform ways we can relate to nature in a really new and different way for us,
Thank you so much, Beth, for your wonderful insights. I appreciate you being on the Celebrate Happiness Roadshow, and I will look forward to having another conversation at another time.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Here's today's key to happiness.
Exercise your body to reduce stress. Regular exercise reduces stress and boosts self-esteem and happiness. To get started,
Take a walk around the block every night after dinner.
sign up for a beginner's class in yoga or Tai Chi.
Start your day with 5 minutes of stretching.
And get back to fun activities you enjoy. Golf, bowling, dancing, yoga, or gardening.
Newsflash! Please sign up for your personal copy of our Keys to Happiness at sandramcknight.com. Thank you for tuning in to the Celebrate Happiness Roadshow podcast. And if you enjoyed the conversation, please help spread the word by sharing our podcast with your friends and family. Before we go, I'd like to thank today's guest, Beth Allgood, for sharing her happiness story. And to share your happiness story on the Celebrate Happiness Roadshow podcast, send an email to Sandra@sandramcknight.com.
Turn your smile on, you can't go wrong. You'll find that love is all around.